Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. We have a great episode today with one of our favorites, but let me bring in our host, Hal Humphreys. Hey, Hal, how are you doing?
Jim Morrison, I'm doing great today. The weather yesterday was absolutely beautiful in a string of inordinately hot days. So I'm doing great.
Well, that's awesome to hear. Well, we have one of our favorites today. We're speaking with Peter Christensen from Valuation Legal. Hey, Peter, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Hal.
Very good to see you, Peter. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. You know, Peter, you're one of our highest rated Buzzcast guests. As an instructor for Appraiser eLearning, people tend to rush to your classes because you're one of the best instructors out there, especially when it comes to legal issues. We're really excited to have you back and chat with us. Most of our listeners already know who you are, so we're not going to, ask you to recap your history in the industry. I do want to dive right in and just ask you, you're kind of known as the guy who keeps track of litigation related to appraisal issues. Are there some court cases or lawsuits that you're aware of that are a little bit recent that might affect appraisers?
There was one that I wrote a little bit about, and I think that appraisers were interested in, and how you might be interested in, because it comes to us from Tennessee. Not your part of Tennessee, Nashville, but it was over in Chattanooga. And yeah, a really interesting case. Now, a lot of appraisers are interested in it because it's just a sad story about some appraisers who did mess up, and I'm not going to use their names today. But there's like the punchline of it actually concerns the lender. And so so the issue was that a bank was making a loan, and to the borrowers, of course, who are going to buy a house. So they're buying as a purchase. The lender hires some local appraisers in Chattanooga to go out and appraise that piece of property. The thing is, the house was under renovation at that point, so things were in disarray. Somebody was fixing up the house to sell it. That loan didn't go through. The appraisers did the appraisal. The loan didn't go through. So, but then those same, no, different borrowers actually. So the appraisers did that appraisal for a different borrower, and so then that transaction didn't go through. So what happened was, different borrower comes along, is going to get an appraisal from a credit union. The credit union, this a month later, the credit union hires some appraisers, happens to hire the same appraisers as who had appraised the house for the bank lender. So these appraisers think, oh, we've got a good thing going. We can just recycle the earlier appraisal report and use that, and we don't even have to go re-inspect. The appraisers rationalized. And so the appraisers do a new report, put a new effective date on it. It's a month later. The problem the appraisers didn't know about is that the borrower had seen the other appraisal report, because the borrower knew the property owner, and the property owner gave these new borrowers, the purchasers, a copy of that appraisal. So the borrowers saw, wait, something's up. This report, well, for one thing, this new report, it wasn't accurate, because in that intervening month, the whole project had been completed. So because the appraisers didn't go out and inspect the property for the second appraisal, the appraisers failed to note that, hey, there's all this renovation's been completed. So the borrowers didn't get their loan because the appraisal was too low, because it talked about a property that was under renovation, wasn't complete, had a lower value on it. The borrowers raised this issue to the credit union, and the borrowers were like, hey, these appraisers aren't being honest with you. They just recycled an older report, and it's not even accurate anymore because of the renovation. And the credit union's response was literally to the borrowers, live with it, forget about it, live with it. And the credit union instructed the appraisers, oh, just change the effective date on that new report that you recycle, just change the effective date back to when you inspected for the bank lender. Now the borrowers didn't let it go. They like the credit union said, just move on. The borrowers didn't let it go. They did go out and get a new appraisal for a new loan with a different lender. They did end up buying the place. They filed a complaint, not against the appraisers. They filed a complaint against the lender. They sued. Well, they didn't just file a complaint. They sued the lender, and they sued the appraisers too for some negligence. But they sued. This is where it gets interesting for the lender. Their claim against the lender was under appraiser independence requirements. The appraiser independence requirements that are in that Truth in Lending Act. They also contain this other provision besides you got to be the loan people have to be independent from the appraiser. They contain an obligation on lenders and other people involved in mortgage transactions to report appraisers to state appraiser licensing agencies when there's a USPAP violation. The lender didn't do that, even though we have very serious USPAP issues happening here, and they went to value too. The lender didn't file any complaint to the state appraiser board. And so, among other claims, the borrowers sued the lender for damages under TILA for not reporting the appraisers to the Tennessee Appraiser Board. I didn't, until I read this case, it never occurred to me that a borrower could sue a lender for failing to report appraisers to a state appraiser board. And so, the credit union tried to get this case dismissed, and the federal court hearing it said, no, these borrowers can sue that credit union. And okay, but were the borrowers damaged financially in any way? Maybe there's some damages having to get a second appraisal, different lender. But the federal court pointed out, no, these borrowers, they can get automatic damages. $10,000 per violation, whatever. I think that's the maximum. But they can get statutory automatic damages for the lender's failure to follow this mandatory reporting requirement in TILA. So this has a
yeah. I have a question about that. So and several of our listeners know that I have a private investigations agency, and I'm aware of one specific area of criminal law where there is a mandatory reporting requirement. I was not aware that there is a mandatory reporting requirement for lenders when it comes to USPAP violations.
Yeah, it came to us because of the Dodd-Frank Act's amendments to FARIA and TILA and other, it amended a lot of laws, created some new ones too, but it amended a lot of details having to do with appraisal. So one of among other things, the Dodd-Frank Act created the appraiser independence requirements.
Right.
So you can't improperly influence an appraiser on a residential loan secured by a dwelling to hit a value. A loan officer can't improperly influence an appraiser to do that. But then right below that section, there's a requirement for lenders. This only pertains to residential mortgage lending. But there's a requirement that lenders or other parties involved in the appraisal process, such as an AMC, there's no AMC in this case, but an AMC has the same obligation. They have an obligation to actually file complaints to state appraiser boards when there is a USPAP violation. The regulations here make clear that they only have to report appraisers to state appraiser boards when that USPAP violation is material and has an impact on value.
Okay.
So here that credit union filed no complaint to a state appraiser board, and they actually are being sued over that by the borrowers. And the court has said, yeah, that legal claim can go forward.
Wow. So the USPAP issues for our appraisers out there that struggle with USPAP, that are worried about USPAP at all times. Back in the day, we used to get USPAP classes where you would leave thinking, oh, I should have died when I was a child. I'm a horrible person. USPAP classes aren't like that anymore, but What is the problem with inspecting a house a month ago and then just changing the effective date?
There's an well, why are you asking me the use PAP issue? I'm not a use PAP instructor, but okay, here's the way I would see that. First of all, the first appraisal was for a different client. Okay, now we've got some confidentiality concerns. The way I see it, you did that prior appraisal and including the assignment results in it, different client, but you're reusing it for another client. Second of all, you have an honesty problem here because that second report with an effective date a month later indicated that the appraisers had inspected, like, let's say it's October, when in fact they had inspected in September. So there's that honesty issue happening there. And it's misleading, it's inaccurate in the appraisal. There might be other use PAP issues going on, but there's some problems there.
You've got issues of intended use, intended user, those kind of things. You've got a new assignment. And look, the reason I asked you the question is you're the attorney, you're the one that's going to help defend someone in this case. And these are things that we would call bad facts for attorneys, right?
These are bad facts. But when you're an attorney and say you're defending something like this, it's not on the attorney to be the expert as far as use PAP. What the attorney has to do is hire an expert witness, someone like you or another appraiser expert, to come in and testify. Okay, here are the standards. Right. Here's what those standards mean in practice. And then this is the expert has to testify to. And then here's how the appraiser lived up to or failed to live up to the standards. So it's not the attorney that has to be the ultimate expert in use PAP or appraisal practice. There's actual expert witnesses that the attorney hires. But yeah, all of those things are. But so then that's what made the credit unions, like, instructions to the appraisers also so crazy. Like, oh yeah, just change the effective date and you're good to go.
Well, I can see an argument that would be, if it's a loan officer saying that to the appraiser, it does have a material impact on the valuation. And that does brush up against appraiser independence. I mean, the appraiser should have, and I'm just guessing. I have not looked at this case. I wasn't aware of it until we talked today. But in the certification, did the appraiser certify that they inspected as of the effective date?
Yep.
I mean, that's a huge problem.
But now that this little thing has been pointed out, that and just we're focused here largely on the lender because the lender got sued, but the appraiser is being sued in the case. They're being sued for negligence or something related. But this thing where you can sue a lender for not reporting to the state appraiser board, whoa. Are there 1,000 cases that could be filed against lenders now for not doing that? That's the shocking thing to me.
Well, let's do this. I need to take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, and we'll come right back. But before we go, I want to tease this. Is there, I mean, in this case, is there a bias angle that we can discuss after the commercial break?
Well, bias works its way into everything we talk about right now. So I think we might touch on bias after the break. And I think this case does relate to bias.
Okay. Well, let's take a break and we'll hear from one of our commercial sponsors, and we will be right back.
The Dictionary of Real Estate Appraisal, 7th edition, is a landmark text that reflects the depth and breadth of appraisal knowledge. Each entry, definition, and reference has been painstakingly researched and designed to reflect an expert understanding of issues that currently impact the profession. The new dictionary is an essential authoritative resource for all appraisers. The dictionary is divided into 2 sections, an alphabetical listing of terms directly related to real estate appraisal, and an addendum with topical glossaries and compilations of terms used by related real estate professionals. Find it at appraisalinstitute.org/dictionary7.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Appraisal Buzz. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. I'm joined today by Peter Christensen from Valuation Legal. Peter, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Before the break, we were talking about this crazy case in Tennessee where the borrower is suing the lender, a credit union, for a couple of things, but not the least of which is for not reporting an appraiser to the state for significant USPAT violations. We teased it out by saying there may be a bias issue in here. Let's just get right into it. What is the bias angle in this case?
Well, okay, here's the bias angle for the lender. That a lender who doesn't report an allegedly biased appraisal that has some USPAP issues in it, perhaps, could have this as an additional claim against the lender. So this it would be a lender's violation of the Truth in Lending Act. I could see being brought in to one of the fair housing type cases that are being filed by lenders in court these days. So it's another legal claim that I could see being made there, and there is another way it relates, because when we have these cases where lenders, appraisers, and also AMCs are being sued for alleged discrimination, a lot of times the lender's attempted defense is, oh, hey, that wasn't our appraisal. We didn't do the appraisal. The appraiser is responsible for it. So we shouldn't have liability. We shouldn't be liable for any alleged discrimination because it's not our appraisal. We just hired that appraiser to do it. And that doesn't work out under fair housing law that well. And the federal government has jumped into some of these bias cases to make that point. But this, instead of appraiser independence requirements being a hoped for defense by lenders, it's actually going to be another legal tool for some plaintiffs in some bias cases against lenders. So a little bit of the tables turning. But this is the kind of case, like, I do a class called Elimination of Bias and Creating Cultural Competency. And it's a 3-hour class that I taught to a lot of appraisers. It actually stems out of California's requirement for a 3-hour class on these subjects, but we teach it with Appraiser eLearning all over the country. So it's an example of a case that I bring in to that class to make it like the class is fresh. Like in that class, I like to talk about what happened last week in the latest case. So this would be an example of a case like that I just touch on in the class.
Okay.
But there is another new interesting case that is like even more like right into the meat of the elimination of bias class. And as I point out in that class, there are not all that many court cases filed against lenders or appraisers right now alleging discrimination. There are only 10, now there's 11 cases filed in court in this recent 4-year focus on the issue of bias in appraisals.
Right.
That's not a lot of cases. A big reason for that is because HUD, the federal agency that is in charge of investigating alleged violation of the Fair Housing Act, it hasn't decided any of the investigations in front of it. It's got 200 plus investigations, hasn't decided any on the merits. So that's like a big logjam. But a new case that was filed last month, filed in the LA areas. This is an example of a case I'm going to talk about in the next presentation of this class in August. And the case involves 4 appraisers being sued in one case. So, and this is unlike other discrimination cases. This discrimination case is filed by the borrowers on a hoped for reverse mortgage. So the reverse mortgage was going to require 2 appraisals. So we had 2 appraisals. They came in with okay values. The reverse mortgage was going to go through. But then for each of those appraisals, the reverse lender required review appraisals. Those review appraisals came in quite a bit lower, about 25% lower than the original appraisers, than the appraisers doing the appraisals did. And so now you have 2 review appraisers set for different appraisals saying much lower values, and the appraisals are higher. So it's the review appraisers who are being sued here. So there were 2 reviews. Well, then, okay, the party's like, let's get 2 more appraisals. 2 more reviews came in lower values. So now we've got 4 review appraisers being sued Four separate appraisers who did values aren't being sued because their values looked okay to the borrowers. So this is going to be a big case. And the thing that makes it kind of interesting that I'll share in the next class is the plaintiff, one of the plaintiffs, because it's a married couple, is a former professional football player. And his wife is a retired accounting professor. So this is quite a bit of a different case. They're African American, and the issue is alleged racial discrimination.
Wow, that is crazy. So here's a question I have for you before we go to the next sponsor break. Aside from, not lying, not certifying that you inspected the house when you didn't inspect the house, and not being overtly biased, what are some other things appraisers can do to keep themselves out of the newspaper in cases like this?
In keeping yourself out of a bias case, I think you kind of touched on some of the common denominators, but another one is if you've got a quality appraisal up front, if you've done the work, if you've done a good job in reporting, if you've done a good job with your appraisal, that lowers the risk of becoming a defendant in one of these cases. And this, I have seen discrimination cases start with the appraiser made the most common error that appraisers ever make, which is they misstated or mismeasured the square footage of the subject property. So now you've got a square footage error. That started with a mistake, and then it devolved from there into an alleged discrimination case. So to answer your question, getting that appraisal report, that appraisal done right up front is the best way of lowering your risk.
Yeah, and I think, in talking about this, things appraisers can do to stay out of trouble. And one of the things I've noticed in several of the bias claims, the fair housing claims against residential real estate appraisers, there's almost always some articulation of the appraiser was rude, the appraiser was short, the appraiser didn't have time. How important do you think it is for us as appraisers out there doing the work? Obviously, we should do really quality appraisal work. That is the absolute best defense, but best practices, talking to people out in the field, how important is it to just be,
Hal, it's super important. But the reason I laugh a little bit about this because I touch on this subject in my class about elimination of bias. And I touch on it at the very end. And I got a slide that says kindness matters. But it's actually the part of the class that makes me nervous. Sometimes I'm nervous to deliver a message to appraisers because telling someone this is like me when I try to tell my wife, do I have nice wife today or grouchy wife? That doesn't go over well at all. So it's tough to tell people to be nice, but you brought it up. Since you brought it up, that's number 2 way to reduce your risk. Just some kindness, respect out in the field, giving that borrower a couple of moments to answer a easy question that they might be posing to you. And so that's how that appraiser who made a square footage mistake and turned it into a fair housing complaint because the borrower said, hey, later after the appraisal report was delivered, hey, you've got the square footage of my house wrong. And the appraiser blew her off, didn't. This was back when appraisers were much busier.
Sure.
And so blew her off, didn't listen, didn't trust the information she was sharing. And she took that, the being blown off part, as being, hey, this appraiser's treating me wrong. I think this appraiser's treating me in a discriminatory way. That might not have been it, but that's what happened. That's the way it was perceived by the borrower. Perhaps the appraiser treated everybody like that, of course. But the borrower, for them individually, took it as, hey, there's something racial here, and filed a complaint to HUD. alleging racial discrimination. So
And
kindness does matter out in the field.
kindness matters to such a degree that look, for us as appraisers, we're out there in the field, we're doing the work, we're inspecting several houses in a day. If it's, today in Tennessee, it's hot as blue blazes out there. You're probably gonna have 2 or 3 shirts in the car to change as you go from house to house because you don't want to walk in all sweaty. Maybe you're tired. Maybe maybe you do, I don't know, 5, 10, however many appraisals a week you do. But for the person at the house, this is one of, statistically speaking, 3 to 5 appraisals they're going to order in their life. And it doesn't hurt us to take a little bit of time to acknowledge that this is confusing to the consumers. They don't understand what we do. And if we can take just a little bit of time to introduce ourselves to them, find out what they have to say, listen to them, that one thing, I think, would eliminate a lot of the problems that people have. With, you get a call from somebody saying, "Hey, you got my square footage wrong." I always listen to that. I'm happy to say, "Okay, tell me why, help me understand."
Yeah, you said it way better than I do, and you did a much better job of explaining it.
Well, let's do this. We're going to come back after this commercial break, and we're going to talk about Peter Christensen's course, Valuation Expo in Las Vegas, August the 19th. And if you haven't signed up for Val Expo yet, do it today. We'll give you all the information to sign up for it at the end of this podcast. But now let's hear from one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
Need a profitable PDC solution for your clients? Jaro's appraisal management software makes the process faster and easier. With Jaro, you can order standard appraisals, inspections, and hybrids, all on one seamless platform. The software also gives you everything you need to manage new vendors by taking care of background checks and letting you shop from a pre-vetted panel of inspectors with a wide range of credentials. Get started with Jaro today at tryjaro, that's tryjaro.com.
Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to the Appraisal Buzz. I'm your host, Hal Humphreys. I've got Peter Christensen with me today. We're talking about legal issues for appraisers, some current lawsuits going on out there, and I think most importantly, Peter's going to be teaching Eliminating Bias and Developing Cultural Competency in Las Vegas on August 19th at Valuation Expo. This class has real world relevance. It's a course that is now required in some states. Besides this course being required, Peter, what is the sales pitch to appraisers to take this class, even if it's not required in their state?
That you're going to get like completely up-to-date information about what is really happening at HUD or in the courts with respect to alleged discrimination claims. Like I'm not going to overblow the problem, and I'm not going to undersell it. I'm going to tell you exactly what's happening. How many cases are there? What can you learn specifically from those cases? And then the other thing is, as I was talking about in the beginning, like it's going to be what happened last week. If there's a new case on August 2nd, I'll be talking about it in the class at Valuation Expo. And so I will be sharing, because it's the newest case, that case filed by the former professional football player and his wife. I'll be talking about that, and I think appraisers will find that case interesting. So that's the newest case. And then some other new things I'm seeing, though, that aren't talked about in other classes is now that we're like 4 years into these bias complaints to HUD and some discrimination complaints in court, statute of limitations is actually becoming relevant in some of these cases and investigations. So how long is the statute of limitations for a borrower to file a complaint to HUD? How long is it that a borrower can sue an appraiser in court? That's you just don't get that kind of detailed legal info in some of the more generic classes.
Okay. Well, I can say without hesitation, and look, I'm just going to admit right here, I'm biased. I like Peter. I've taken his classes a number of times. He's one of our favorite instructors at Appraisal eLearning. But if you haven't taken a class from Peter Christensen, I beg you, sign up for Val Expo, come out, take this class. I think you'll find it really interesting. And again, a lot of times in this world of continuing education, from the provider's perspective, there's a lot of talk about courses that are evergreen, like, conceptual courses that will last for a long time, because you can make more money off of a course that you just do one time and you teach it for a gazillion episodes. We're not as interested in evergreen content as we are in relevant, up-to-date content. And that's the reason I'm such a fan of Peter Christensen, because he brings in up-to-date information every time he teaches his class. So, Peter, thank you for being here today. I want to bring Jim Morrison in real quick and ask him a couple of questions. Jim, do we have an anonymous appraiser question today?
We don't have an anonymous appraiser question today. If anybody has any questions for our audience, you can reach out to us at comments@appraisalbuzz.com. But I will say that everybody should go and register for Peter's class. It's going to be August 19th at Valuation Expo at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas. And you can come out the weekend before, stay for Peter's class on Monday, do the opening reception on the trade show floor, have fun, meet people, and then come home and write it all off. It's a perfect trip for you.
And I'm going to just add to that. Don't just come out for Peter's class. Yes, do that. Come out for Peter's class, but stick around for Val Expo. It is a fantastic conference. We have a lot of fun. There's a lot of really good, up-to-date, pertinent information for appraisers delivered during the main conference days. Join us. We'd love to see you there.
Well, I know I'm going to be hanging out on that trade show floor the whole time, because I really like just hanging out and talking with all the different vendors and all the appraisers around that floor. So yeah, great place to hang out for a few days.
Yeah. And Morrison, I think, it's fair to point out to our listeners, if you've, thought to yourself, boy, I'd like to ask that Peter Christensen a question or two, this is your chance. He's going to be there. He's an approachable guy. I know he seems intimidating because he's so gruff and mean, but he's actually approachable. He's a good dude, and he's going to be there. So join us at Val Expo. Jim, one more time, with how do they sign up for Val Expo?
So you can go to valuationexpo.com. We'll put the link in the description below. But also, if you've already registered and decided after listening to this, hey, I want to add on Peter's class, you can just reach out to us. Karen can take care of that for you, or email info@valuationexpo.com. We'll get that added on for you.
Lovely. And I think we'll put all of that information in the text right below this podcast window on the podcast page and on the YouTube page. So if you're not fast enough, which I'm not, to catch Jim Morrison's vocal articulation of the website and the URL, it'll be right underneath us on the screen. Probably clickable links. You can just go right over and sign up for Val Expo. Morrison, do we have anything else we need to cover today?
No, that's all. Thanks, Peter.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And if we have nothing else to say, on behalf of Peter Christensen and Jim Morrison, I'm Hal Humphreys, and that is your Appraisal Buzzcast for this week.